light shining bright for all to see. The love of Christ, a living light shining in you and me. Tell the world, share His love so they can know the Holy One, God the Son, let it show. Be the light shining bright for all to see. The love of Christ, living light shining in you and me. Tell the world, share His love so they can know the Holy One, God the Son, let it show. Now is the time to let your light shine. Oh, now is the time to let your light shine. Be the light. Thank you.
So I hope you were blessed by that song. You know, the Bible says that God often speaks through the mouth of babes. Amen? The mouth of children. I can sense the word of God coming from Sam. Thank you for sharing your song that you wrote with us this evening. As was mentioned, my name is Anthony Baca, and I'm very excited to be here. I come from Prescott, Arizona, for those that are familiar with Arizona, up in the mountains there. But it's so beautiful out here. This is like a hidden oasis in Southern California. I did not know Ojai even existed until I was invited to come out here, and I looked it up. I was like, I know I've driven through Thousand Oaks and Ventura before, but I never knew that there was like this hidden, like, mountainish oasis out here, and it's so beautiful out here. The stars are amazing. I love my time out here. So you are blessed to be out here. This presentation is entitled Revelation of Healing. It is a Bible presentation. It is a Bible-based presentation. And I will be interweaving a lot of my personal experience through it. In other words, we're going to be going on a journey together through a number of concepts that I believe are very important for the times that we live in, and hopefully that through this process to experience healing found in the person that I call the revelation of love in the Bible. And so that's my goal and my experience, a little background of who I am. I was not born and raised in a religious or a Christian home. There was no spirituality in my home whatsoever. I grew up in an atheistic environment, and I was a Darwinian evolution for most of my life until I was in college. And so when it comes to the idea of God and believing in God or looking at the Bible for evidence for different concepts about life, that was a very foreign concept. And I know we all come from different backgrounds. We all come from different experiences, but that's okay. Hopefully we can come together with an open mind just to study, to learn, and hopefully take something positive from these seminars that can change our lives in very practical, tangible ways. Does that sound like a good plan? Wonderful, wonderful. So let's see if my clicker works tonight, and it works. So revelation of healing. We're going to be talking about healing in a number of ways because really there are four primary components of a human being. There's the physical component, which I think when we think of healing, that's what we normally think of, right? Or health, right? How many of you made that New Year's resolution to get healthier, right? I'm sure when you did, you were primarily thinking of your physical health, but there is also the mental health. There's the emotional health, and there is the spiritual health. That these are known as the four primary components that make up the health of an individual. I've spent the last couple of years studying out in Arizona at Northern Arizona University and at Arizona State University and working in the research department as a biochemist researcher and public health researcher. I've interviewed at 2 medical schools. I have 2 more interviews coming up. I've been accepted to 2 medical schools, and so I'm very passionate about healing and health. I'm very passionate about helping people to find holistic healing in their experience in all 4 of these categories, and that's the type of physician I want to be one day. So I'm excited to share a little bit. I believe in research as well. I'm an evidence-based individual. I love evidence. I like when people share their concepts, but I'm like, that's a great concept. Where's the evidence for the concept? And I know I'm a nerd. Before I go to bed, I read like JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, as bedtime stories, right? Like these are like my bedtime stories. So aside from Bible stories. And so here's an interesting article entitled Understanding the Connection Between Spiritual Being and Physical Health. And what does this article teach? This article actually points something out interesting, that a higher spiritual well-being may be linked to lower stress, lower blood pressure, lower risk of heart disease, and reduced depression. In other words, there's a strong correlation between someone's spiritual health and the quality of their physical health. This has been demonstrated in so many research publications from Harvard and other institutions. During my research as a pre-medical student, I've read a number of volumes on the subject. It is fascinating to see. In fact, the physician who I shadowed with in a clinical setting, he was an internist. There was a patient who was terminally ill, and he encouraged them to find a religious connection, a religious family. And I remember I talked with the doctor, because I said, didn't you tell me you were atheist? He said, oh, I am. And I was like, so why are you encouraging your patient to try to get to know God if you don't believe in God? He says, I can't explain it, but the research is clear. He said, I can't explain it, but the research is clear. Now, when an individual has good spiritual health, their physical health improves. And I care for my patient enough to encourage them to do what the research says is best for them. Is that fascinating? I thought that was fascinating, to say the least. But it's not just the physical health that's impacted by the spiritual health. Another article entitled The Relationship Between Spirituality, Health-Related Behavior, and Psychological Well-Being, or what you might term mental health. And this is a direct quote from this article. The results show that both spirituality and health-related behaviors are positively correlated to psychological well-being, and that the relationship with spirituality is also mediated by health-related behaviors. Now, mind you, these are scientific publications. These aren't religious publications. These are scientific publications where they've looked at a population group and have studied this concept on this population group. And what they determined is that the well-being of someone's spiritual health is actually directly correlated with the quality of their mental health. And we know in America today that is a golden term, isn't it? Mental health. It's become a hot topic in this day and age. Researchers have realized how much of a mental health epidemic we really have in America, especially with people 21 years and younger. It is a very scary, rapid increase in mental health challenges that we are seeing taking place. Now, I'm not just speaking from a research perspective when we talk about the subjects, and again, we are going to talk about Bible and theology, because I think that's going to complement the subjects that we're going to be studying, but I'm also speaking from personal experience. This is, if I can get my clicker to click forward here. There it is. There's a picture of me before. This is me weighing in at about 400 pounds. I was twice the man I am today, if I can say it that way. And I clearly was suffering from a lot of physical ailments, including high blood pressure. I was a pre-diabetic. I probably was diabetic. I just never got tested again because I didn't want to see the doctor again. In all reality, if you know how they measure your A1C, that was probably elevated enough to be a diabetic. I just, again, didn't measure it. I was dealing with depression and another number of issues. I was dealing with alcohol abuse and other substance abuse at this time in my experience. And so I was your walking and I was an unbeliever. I had zero spiritual health at this time. So in those four categories of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, I pretty much got zeros across the board. I was the walking poster child of neglect of health in America today. And that's who I was, but clearly I'm not who I once was. I actually was kicked out of high school. I was kicked out of college. And here I am now accepted to 2 medical schools, interviewing for 2 more medical schools. Throughout these seminars, we're not just going to be looking at the prophetic aspect of Scripture, but we're going to be correlating it, hopefully, with healing that should occur within our experience. So we will have a full presentation on just my physical health journey from the Bible, what I learned in Scripture that actually changed my physical health completely. And you're going to see it just from the Bible. We'll be talking about mental health. It's the power of the mind for an entire presentation. And we will also be talking about Bible prophecy and other important biblical concepts. These are some of the major themes that I want to cover with you. How many of you are excited for these presentations? Very good. I'm glad that you're excited. I'm excited to share them. A lot of these are brand new ones I just put together just for this series. So again, I'm excited to share them with you over the next week. Tonight's presentation is actually called Case for a Creator. Where are we going with this presentation? Clearly, I am a Bible-based believer. A lot of the evidence and the things that got me started were found in the Bible. And in order to share that with you, I first need to take a step back and ask the first most important question. Why, as an individual who was once an atheist, do I now read the Bible? Is that a fair question to ask? And so we have to take a step back, and it actually wasn't the Bible that convinced me to read the Bible. I know that sounds different, right? Loving science, and I was a philosopher. I don't know if anyone here loves philosophy. I was a guy that loved to sit under the stars and just muse about the universe, muse about life, muse about my existence, these types of thoughts, and, read poetry that dealt with that type of philosophical concepts. So we're going to take a step back and see, what did I find in my journey through science and philosophy that actually led me to give the Bible a chance? That's tonight's presentation. Tomorrow, I'm going to be sharing the clear, undisputable evidence I found as to why I chose the Bible as my source of knowledge. And that one's going to be super exciting. That one I'm very passionate about, and I cannot wait to share it. But again, tonight we're taking a step back, and we're going to be talking about case for a creator. And as a Bible believer, I believe that I can do nothing of myself, so I'm going to pray. You do not feel obligated to pray if you're not a believer at this time. If you are, you're welcome to bow your heads with me and pray if you feel comfortable, whatever makes you comfortable. I'm just going to say a short, brief prayer at this time before I begin with the actual presentation. Father, bless us as we talk about these important concepts. Guide my thoughts, guide my words. I pray that they would be clear and understandable. In Jesus' name, amen. So as we begin our presentation, Case for a Creator, one thing I love in life, and that is truth. I love truth. I actually enjoy debate. I don't know if any of you did speech and debate in high school or college. I was the guy that loved debate. To me, it was just, even when I knew I was wrong, I loved to debate for debate's sake. I just love the concept of debate. But ultimately, in my journey, one thing I was always fascinated with is what is true, what is real, what is actual. And in life, there are a lot of pit holes on that journey, isn't there? There's a lot of pit holes as you're trying to figure out what is actually true. You know this from experience, right? You see that YouTube commercial on the latest weight loss plan, and you're like, is this true? And it's like a pit hole, right? You fall in, realize $300 later, nothing happened, and you're like, oh, there's another one of those gimmicks on YouTube, right? On the journey to find what is true, there are a lot of pit holes that we fall into. And I fell along these as well. I always wondered, why am I here? Where did I come from? Why do I exist? And my original thought was quite simple. I had evolved from, that I was part of a species that have evolved over millions and billions of years. That was kind of my general concept that I had personally believed for a significant portion of my life. So why do I think or believe that God exists? When we talk about the existence of God, we touch on a very important word, and this word, you might have heard, is the word faith. Now, this was a word I did not enjoy as a young person growing up, because every time I would debate a Christian on the existence of God, they would always say, you just need to have faith. Yeah, you just need to have faith. And semantics, right? How do you define your terms? Well, I believe that faith, the idea that was being communicated was faith means blindly believe. How many of you have the general sense of that word, right? That faith tends to seem to mean, by how it's used, faith means you just got to believe. And I would say, why? And they would say, because the Bible said so. Can you see why as an atheist that was hard for me to swallow? Yeah. And so this idea of faith was really hard for me, but then I learned something on my journey about this word faith. That faith is not what I thought it was. In fact, the Bible doesn't call us to blindly believe, but it actually says, come and let us reason. That the Bible actually wants us to use our minds, our brains. It wants us to think. It wants us to reason, to rationalize, to deduce what is true from the facts. Now, I don't know about you, but that gets me excited. I like that idea a lot. And this is why in Hebrews 11, verse 6, it says, faith is the substance of things hoped for. Substance, that means it's tangible. It's something that you should be able to grapple with, to grab, and to know for yourself. I forgot to make a brief announcement at the beginning, but I see some of you doing it. It makes me excited. I encourage you to take notes. Amen? I encourage you to take notes because the last person you should ever trust is a preacher. It's the last person you should ever trust is a preacher. You should write down the thoughts, and I want you to think about them for yourself. When we look at Bible verses, you should read them for yourself to make sure that what you're hearing from the pulpit is actually accurate. So those that are taking notes, that makes me encouraged to see. And those that can, I encourage you to take notes if you can. If not, you can always ask me for some notes. Send me an email. I'd be happy to email you some of these notes. So let's reason together tonight. Again, tonight's not going to be a Bible presentation. I can dig into the Bible, but we're going to come and reason together over some concepts. We're going to look at the law of biogenesis, the biological information, the law of first cause, the law of design, and what is known as the moral argument. These are 5, and there are many more, but these are 5 of the primary concepts that I stumbled across as an atheist while I was just enjoying science, enjoying philosophy, that eventually led me to the logical conclusion that maybe I should give intelligent design a chance. Not enough to convince me completely, but enough to really lead me that maybe I should give it a chance. So let's dive in to the first one, the law of biogenesis. And don't worry, this isn't going to be like your science classroom, I promise you that. It's going to be very simple for us this evening so that we can really grasp it and take it home with us. So the law of biogenesis, what does this law state? Simply stated, life comes from life. That is the law right there. Life, Genesis, the beginning or the source of. The law of biogenesis is that the source of life must come from life. How many of you know this intuitively, right? We don't expect dead things to give birth to living things. We don't expect dead matter, which is a more accurate way of saying it, to produce living matter. We don't expect a dead cell to produce a living cell. We don't expect it to replicate into a living cell or duplicate itself. We don't expect this intuitively. We know this to be true. Said it this way, it is impossible for something that is living to come from something that is non-living. That's all the law states. We all got the law? Pretty simple, right? Pretty simple, pretty easy to follow. So if we continue and restate this law in a different way, I just said this one, living matter only comes from pre-existing living matter. I am alive, therefore I have come into existence from another living being. And I think that we all get this. Like, I am here because I came from my parents. And my parents are here because they came from their parents. And their parents are here because they came from their... Yeah, and it seems like a never-ending question, which really leads to a simple question. What started the whole process? You have 2 answers, 2 options. You have that parents came from parents for an infinite amount of time, which we know that can't be the case. Or there was a point in which there was the first parents who started giving birth to all other parents. Are you tracking with me? Now, you have 2 options. Well, it either came from non-living, materialistic objects in space, or it came from pre-existing living matter. The law of biogenesis indicates that it must come from pre-existing living matter. Therefore, there must have been a living being that caused life to exist in the form of a species we call humanity. That is the simple conclusion of the law of biogenesis. Science doesn't have a clear answer for that. It says that dead matter produced living matter, but the Bible gives a simple answer. When you follow the lineage all the way back, it finds its source in the being that it refers to as God. That he was the living being that started the progression of all other living beings that we know as humans, and that chain of events has occurred, and he was the beginning or the source of that. So that's the first concept, the law of biogenesis. And I remember reading this for the first time. I was looking at videos and reading some books on this and watching some things on this, and I was kind of mind blown. I was like, wait, if that's like a law in science, then how is it that I believe that we come from non-living matter? So that was the first conflict I had in my thinking. The second one is the law of biological evidence. The law of biological evidence. Let's go ahead and dig in here. Yes, it's on the screen. As scientists began to decode the human DNA molecule, they found something quite unexpected, an exquisite language composed of some 3 billion genetic letters, one of the most extraordinary discoveries of the 20th century. DNA, those 4 genetic letters that make you who you are, that if you were to scramble that genetic code, you would no longer be a sentient human being. You wouldn't be who you are anymore. You'd be something else, something entirely different. We don't know exactly what it'd be, depending on how you scramble that particular code. Going on, it says, scientists have found the genetic code has all of the key elements. The coding regions of DNA, explains Dr. Stephen Meyer, have exactly the same relevant properties as a computer code or language. Isn't that fascinating? When you look at this computer code or computer language or binary code, binary language, what they're saying is that DNA in itself appears to be like some type of software code. It is the code that makes you who you are, that if the code were scrambled, you would no longer be who you are. So it had to be in exactly the right order in order for you to exist. Bill Gates, I think we all know who Bill Gates is. Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, commented that DNA is like a software program, only much more complex than anything we've ever devised. Much more complex than anything we've ever devised. Did it take some brains to write the code for Microsoft? Yes or no? Yeah. Would you think that if you were to take a monkey and to put a monkey on a keyboard and he were to start hammering on the keyboard, that he would produce the code required for Microsoft? No, you wouldn't expect that, right? In fact, there was a statistic on this, that if you were to take what is estimated for the dimensions of the universe and fill it with monkeys hammering on keyboards nonstop repeatedly, that they are more likely to accidentally produce a play by Shakespeare than if you were to scramble the genetic code and you were to accidentally come up with what is required to create a human being. In other words, the probability is mind-blowing that to say this happened by mere chance is a remarkable claim in and of itself. It's almost borderline a miracle to say such a thing. DNA itself appears to be some type of code that someone placed there to indicate and to create what you are. And if there's a genetic code or any type of software code, it requires a mind, an intelligence. Therefore, by looking at the genetic code, it appears that is more logical, more believable to have an intelligent designer. The Christian answer, all things were made through him, that's God, and without him was not anything made that was made. The Christian belief, or the Bible belief, is that there is an intelligent designer, something with the mind, the ability to think and process, that actually made you who you are. So then when you find a genetic code inside of you that appears the greatest software writer in the universe put there, it kind of just makes sense. All right, let's go to the next one. Cosmological evidence. This is kind of my favorite one personally. This is the one that really got me because it involved Albert Einstein. I really appreciated Albert Einstein and some of the contributions that he had made. So let's talk about the cosmological evidence here. Now this is more of a philosophical argument, but you'll see where we're going with it in a moment. Okay, so the concept is really simple, that if something began to exist, then something caused it to exist. In other words, this room, I think we would all agree at one point did not exist, correct? Maybe 50 years ago it did, maybe 100 years ago it did, but maybe 1,000 years ago this room probably did not exist here. Maybe, I'm going to guess that. So if you knew 1,000 years ago this room, this building was not here, and now all of a sudden you see that the building is here, you have to conclude that what happened? It was built. Someone caused it to exist. That is all the law of first cause is saying. That if something began to exist, then at its beginning, something aside from it caused it to exist. You have a MacBook. My MacBook's in the back there, on the projecting on the screen. At one point, that MacBook did not exist. Now that MacBook does exist, in indicating someone someone caused it to exist. That's all the law is stating. If the universe, therefore, had a beginning, a starting point, then something would have actually had to cause it. Now, here's the thing that caused it cannot be bound to it. In other words, the people who built this room, are they still in the room today? No, because the thing that causes the thing to exist that before did not exist, right, must be able to transcend or step outside of the thing that they have created. You build a room, that's wonderful. Can you go in the room? Yes. But can you also transcend or go out of the room? Yes. The beautiful thing about the law of first cause is actually demands that the thing that caused the thing to exist must not be bound to the thing that was actually created. Whoever created my laptop is not stuck to my laptop, correct? They can transcend the laptop. They can leave the laptop whenever they want. So let's continue with this. Did the universe actually have a beginning point? Did it start to exist? Now this is mind-blowing. For the majority of recorded human history, humanity believed that the universe was infinite, that it actually had no beginning and no end. However, in 1991, the COBE satellite, picking up the heat waves or radiation decay in the universe, were able to actually, with data, show that the universe, in fact, had a beginning, and they were able to show this because the universe is cooling off. Therefore, they were able to demonstrate that at one point it was hotter, and therefore something is happening to the universe, and the conclusion was that the universe had a starting point, but now it is, through entropy, cooling off. So, moving on, it says here, unbelievably important, they have found the holy grail of cosmology, Michael Turner says. Now, if we can look at these quotes here, these next quotes on the screen. Stephen Hawking. Does anyone know this name, Stephen Hawking, by chance? Formerly known as the brightest man. I believe he died in 2018, passed away in 2018. But before his passing, he was considered the brightest mind in the world by many people. So I like to quote him a lot from some of his books that I've read. So Stephen Hawking, it says here, he says, it is the discovery of the century, if not of all time, referring to what the COBE satellite indicated, that the universe, in fact, had a starting point. Here it goes on, George Smoot, what we have found is evidence for the birth of the universe. It's like looking at God. And again, this is an individual, the COBE project leader from UC Berkeley, who is saying this statement, not a pastor or a theologian. The COBE data regarding the universe indicated that it truly did, in fact, have a beginning. This was not new news, by the way. Albert Einstein, during his time, about 70 years prior to this, came up with known as the general law of relativity. You might be familiar with this law, and because of this law, mathematically, he indicated that the universe had a beginning because the universe was expanding at a constant rate. He then looked through the big Hubble telescope and was able to actually show that the universe is in fact expanding. It's moving. And so the concept was in his mind, well, if the universe is doing this right now, as time goes forward, what would the universe do if you reverse time? It would contract. That's exactly right. Until you get to a point where it's what individuals call the point of density, or the point where all things began to exist, which we call the universe. Stephen Hawking again, from A Brief History of Time, says this: almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had the evidence is in on this one. We know that the universe at one point did not exist. I know, let your mind wrap around that concept, right? But at one point, the universe did not exist, but now we know the universe does in fact exist. And then we have to ask the obvious question, what was the cause? Because everything that begins to exist has a cause. What caused the universe to exist? Now remember, the room, right? The thing that causes it must be able to transcend it or go out of it, right? Therefore, as Stephen Hawking said, space and time were created at this event. Whatever created the universe must be able to transcend space and... Does that sound like a materialistic idea to you? No. And so when you look at the law of first cause, it's quite clear that whatever created the universe must transcend the universe and must transcend time itself. Again, none of these laws really on their own demonstrate anything too clearly, but when you start combining them together, it starts to make a little bit of sense. Life must come from life. There's a genetic code indicating that there was a mind, an intelligence behind it. And here we're looking at the cosmological argument. It must be able to transcend the materialistic universe. You can probably start to see where we're going with this, right? We have a couple more to go. Oh, the Christian response to this is, in the beginning, who created? God created the heavens and the earth. At one point, things did not exist, but then they did exist. Next, the teleological argument, or that's a mouthful, so better said, the evidence of design. The evidence of design. So I want to look at a couple pictures here with you and get your thoughts. Okay, does anyone know what this is a picture of? Grand Canyon, very good. I'm from Arizona, so I love this place. I like to go there, watch the sunrise over the dark canyon. It's a beautiful experience if you've never done it. Now, Grand Canyon, I think we got the name there. There we go. If I were to tell you that the Grand Canyon most likely formed from natural causes, that water carved this thing out over an X amount of period of time. There's different views on exactly how the Grand Canyon was formed, but would that be somewhat close to rational to think that? Sure, it's kind of jagged and rugged, and there's a river kind of running through it, and it's kind of not really symmetrical. It looks like it could have kind of happened just from naturalistic causes. I don't think we would say bulldozers went through there and carved that thing out. Would you agree? Okay. So we would say naturally. Now, if you were just walking around and had never seen this before in your life, and you happen to come across this right here, Mount Rushmore, would you look at Mount Rushmore and say to yourself, wow, I can't believe water ran down that mountain for 20,000 years and formed that mountain like that? Would you think that? Okay, so intuitively, when you look at the two, it's kind of obvious, right? When you look at one, it's like, no, it's chaotic, it's not symmetrical, it's random, it appears to have been formed naturally. However, when we look at the other one, there's symmetry. You know that someone actually designed it. It's like so painfully obvious when you look at it that someone formed that, and that could have possibly happened naturally. Stephen Hawking, again, if we can bring up his quote here, has estimated. So let's look at the universe now. Stephen Hawking has estimated that if the rate of the universe's expansion, remember we talked about how the universe is growing at a specific rate, had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million. If you don't know what that number is, I don't expect you to. It's a number so small, I can't even comprehend how small that is. It's a really small number. The universe would have recollapsed into a hot fireball due to gravitational attraction. If I can say that in common language, the universe is expanding at a specific rate, had a certain velocity, a certain acceleration initially, right? And it went. But if it was too slow, the gravitational pull would have went like this and just right back together. That's all he's saying. But if it was too fast, the big objects, planets and other things would have never actually formed. So in other words, it couldn't be too fast, but it couldn't be it had to be just right. Isn't that fascinating? So here he's saying that if the gravitational attraction at its origin was any different, it's not that life would be unlikely, it's that life would be impossible. Going on, Davies calculates, speaking of planet Earth now, that a change in the strength of gravity or of the weak force by merely 1 part in 10 raised to the 100th power would have prevented a life-permitting universe. In other words, gravity has a fixed constant, and had this constant been a little stronger or a little weaker, it's not that life would be unlikely, it's that life would be impossible. If it were any stronger, the only thing that could survive was probably small bacteria. Everything else would be crushed by the gravitational pull. If it were any weaker, we wouldn't be standing on planet Earth. We'd be flying off the planet because the gravity would be too weak to actually hold us to the planet. Planets wouldn't hold together because gravitational force wouldn't be strong enough, etc., etc. In other words, if gravity were a little stronger or a little weaker, life would not exist. Continuing, Robert J. Strahl, the head of NASA's Goddard Institute of Space Studies, refers to this as the most powerful evidence for the existence of God ever to come out of science. What is he referring to? He's referring to the fact that it appears that the universe has so many parameters, and I think there's about 40 or so of these parameters that we know of, so many of these parameters that are so fine-tuned that if they were just slightly off either direction, life would cease to exist. I'll give you another one. If the earth were a little bit closer to the sun, what would happen? We'd burn up. If we were a little further from the sun, we would. If the moon was a little bit off, the oceans would flood the world, right? So, I mean, when you look at all the parameters for life to exist, there are so many of them that if anything was just slightly off, life would cease to exist. What is this? And so this, when you look at it, it's like looking at Mount Rushmore. You're looking at something that appears that it was made by someone. It was designed by someone, intentionally put there so life could exist. This is actually one of the biggest challenges. I had a lot of atheistic friends, obviously, from back in the day. And some of these atheists, when I would share some of these thoughts with them, I asked, what were your thoughts? Obviously, they're like, well, we haven't got a good answer for that yet, right? Because that's a pretty interesting thought. You know, the obvious answer is chance. We happen to have a universe fine-tuned for life to exist by mere chance. But again, when you look at how fine-tuned it is, that it's like looking at Mount Rushmore and saying a waterfall used to be here and formed this mountain. It just doesn't logically and rationally make the most sense. Not saying that it's not probable, or not possible, but it's definitely not probable to have happened that way. The Christian answer, for thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it. He established it. He created not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. That's why everything was made, so that it could be inhabited, which appears that the earth and the universe itself were designed in such a way that life, sentient life, intelligent creatures could in fact exist. Our last one, the moral evidence. The moral evidence. The moral evidence is an interesting concept. It states something quite simple. It states that if God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. Let me explain. I'm not saying that if God doesn't exist, you couldn't have a sense of morality. Because society can always tell you what's right and what's wrong. We call that subjective morality, and that can change from culture and from generation to generation. You look at movies today. If you were to play the movies today back in the 40s or something, 1940, people would probably raise an eyebrow or 10, right? They probably wouldn't be too excited about that. And so we know that things change over time. That's subjective morality. This is describing objective morality, which it doesn't matter where you're from, what time period you're from, what culture you're from. There are things that you as a human being know. If no one ever told you was wrong, if you just saw it, you would know something's not right. That's an objective moral thing. But since God does exist, then objective moral values do exist. Because there has to be some measurement for something to actually objectively exist. Because then the question would be, where did that objective moral value come from? For example, if you had never been told murder was wrong, and you had grew up and you became, a teenager, and you saw someone murdered, you would probably know intuitively there's something not right with that. Even if no one ever told you that that's wrong, it's like this moral compass that all human beings have, and we often refer to it as our conscience. That's right. That beautiful, immaterialistic thing that we can't dissect, we can't see it, but we know that little still voice in our mind that tells us this is right and this is wrong, right? So those things exist. Now, every law has some type of lawgiver. In other words, a law has to come from somewhere. You don't have laws or morality from just nowhere. It makes no sense. So it had to have a source in something or someone. And since there is a moral law within people, it logically makes sense that there was some type of moral lawgiver, or I should say it this way, that whatever caused us to exist must have a sense of morality. Must have a sense of morality. Does inanimate material, physical material, have a sense of morality? So it's very interesting to think this through, that we are moral creatures, therefore we must have come from something with a sense of morality. When you look here at these two individuals, if you know them, the man that you see on the screen is Adolf Hitler. The woman you see on the screen is Mother Teresa. If no one had ever told you what was right and wrong in the world, you just kind of grew up and you saw what these individuals were doing to people. Even if no one ever told you, again, what was right or wrong, you probably have an instinctive, a gut, we call that our gut feeling, right? You'd have a gut feeling that what Adolf Hitler was doing was wrong, and you'd have a gut feeling that what Mother Teresa was doing was actually pretty good. It was like pretty nice. There was something special about what she was doing. Now, this leads us to the subject when you're dealing with the moral concept of the human conscience. If the universe began with dead matter, this is quoting G.P. Moreland, having no conscience, how then do you get something totally different? Consciousness, living, thinking, feeling, believing creatures from materials that don't have that. So this individual is just pretty much saying, how can that actually occur? But if everything started with the mind of God, he said, we don't have a problem with explaining the origin of our minds. Now, this next quote is one of my favorite to share, because it's quoting another atheist, but it's fascinating what he says. It's not ambiguous. It's actually quite clear what he's indicating. So J.L. Mackie says this in The Miracle of Theism. He says, moral properties, or this idea of a morality, a conscience, constitute so odd a cluster of properties and relations that they are most unlikely to have arisen in the ordinary course of events without an all-powerful God to create them. Now, again, is this a Christian who's saying this? Is it a Bible believer who's saying this? A religious person? No. This is someone who's an atheist, and he is befuddled by the idea that we have a conscience. Can't explain it. Now, again, he doesn't say it doesn't come from materialistic, and he tries to argue in his book his own reasoning why he thinks it might, but he at least acknowledges the reality that he has a difficult time swallowing that pill. That he can't fully explain how you can have the mind, a conscience, a moral compass, unless there was some type of God who had put that within you as a human being. Here are a couple personal testimonies from different individuals as we close. Through my scientific work, I have come to believe more and more strongly that the physical universe is put together with an ingenuity so astonishing that I cannot accept it merely as brute fact. These are people who were once atheists who had become Christians, or believers in the Bible is what I should say. It blew our minds, Olson said. For the first time we began to see there were reasons behind Christianity. Deciding to believe would definitely not be committing intellectual suicide. You see, when I was an atheist, I actually thought all people who believed in the Bible had committed intellectual suicide. I believed that they had thrown out all reason, all logic, all rational process, and just blindly accepted something for no reason at all. And when I started reading these things for myself for the first time and studying these things out and digging into these things, I started to come to a conclusion that if I were to become a Christian, it would not actually be intellectual suicide. In fact, it would be something quite different. I realized that if I were to embrace Darwinism and its underlying premise of naturalism, I would have to believe that nothing produces everything, that non-life produces life, that randomness produces fine-tuning, that chaos produces information, that unconsciousness produces consciousness, and non-reason produces reason. This is a former atheist. If you haven't heard Lee Strobel's personal story, it's amazing. He was an atheist for his whole life. He married an individual who was also an atheist. And then one day she came home and she had a conversation with him that she had become a Christian. And Lee Strobel was a journalist. So he went on a mission. He decided to interview the leading specialists in different fields of science to gather the evidence to convince his wife that it was foolish for her to believe in a God. After interviewing the leading specialists in these different fields, when Lee Strobel sat down and looked at the evidence, this was his concluding thought. Based on this, I was forced to conclude. I love that language. Forced to conclude as a journalist, someone who just wanted to know what was true. I was forced to conclude that Darwinism would require a blind leap of faith that I was not willing to make. And he came to the same conclusion that I came to. This idea that if I were to believe that list right there, nothing produces everything, non-life produces life, and so on, I would actually have to blindly believe something that is illogical and irrational and honestly doesn't quite make sense when you think it through. Or I can look at the flip side of the coin. To believe in God actually was more logical and more rational. And to be a Darwinian evolutionist, I would actually have to, at that point, the conclusion of my studies, commit intellectual suicide to become an evolutionist. Or have intellectual integrity and become a believer in a God. A believer in an intelligent designer. I like to know what is true. I like to research. I like to study. And my journey has led me to one logical conclusion. It's led me to some others I'll share with you. But as far as tonight's presentation, I'm just going to confine it to tonight's presentation. We'll talk about the actual Bible in our next presentation. That it's more logical and more rational to believe that there is a transcendent, intelligent, thinking being referred to as God that started all of this. And I want to ask you a question. I want you to think about this question as you're going to hear the words of this song in a moment. will you choose today, I don't know where each of you are at, to actually give God a chance to weigh this evidence out, to think it through, and to be open to the possibility that there is something out there, that there is a God who created all this? I want you to think about that question as you hear the words of this song.
From the highest of heights to the depths of the sea, creation's revealing your majesty. From the colors of fall to the fragrance of spring, every creature's unique in the song that it sings, all exclaiming, indescribable, uncontainable. You place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. All powerful, untamable, awestruck we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim, you are amazing, God. Who has told every lightning bolt where it should go? Or seen heavenly storehouses laden with snow? Who imagined the sun and gave source to its light, yet conceals it to bring us the coolness of night? Uncan fathom, indescribable, uncontainable. You place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. All powerful, untamable, awestruck we fall to our knees as we humbly proclaim that you are amazing, God. Indescribable, uncontainable. You place the stars in the sky and you know them by name. You are amazing, God. Incomparable, unchangeable. You see the depths of my heart and you love me the same. You are amazing, God.
The Bible says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament or the sky shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. The Bible also says in Romans chapter 1, verse 20, For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. I believe the evidence is in that God was so smart in how he did this thing, that he created the world and the universe in such a way that through simply studying nature, we would find him. And as I found on my journey, scientist after scientist, philosopher after philosopher, researcher after researcher, intelligent man after intelligent woman, who stood on these premises that it was more logical and rational to believe in a divine creator, an intelligent designer. And as I looked at the evidence, it gave me the strength as an individual, I'll be honest, not to become a Christian. No. But to at least give God a chance, to dig a little deeper, to be willing to just explore the possibility that there actually might be a God. How many of you want to give that same opportunity in your own experience? How many of you want to give a chance to say, if there is a God, I would like to give him a chance to help me to find him? Is that your desire? I hope it is. Because I will tell you, it's probably one of the greatest discoveries you will ever make in your life if you go on the journey. Now you may be asking, well, okay, that's great. There's an intelligent being, there's a God, but which God? How many gods are in this world that people talk about, right? Oh man, you should have seen the research. You should see my desk, man. You thought that was a lot of research. You had no idea what came next. Don't worry. Nothing will be as scientific as that, I promise you, in the future. But it leads us to our next presentations. We're going to be answering a couple of good questions. Primarily, we're going to be looking at three main things. Number one, how do we know that the God of the Bible is the true one God? Is there actually evidence that leads us to that conclusion? I believe the answer is yes. And I'm going to share with you what finally for me was the final pin in that decision tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. right here. Tomorrow evening, back up here, at 7 p.m., we're then going to answer the next logical question. Well, if the God of the Bible is true, doesn't it call him a God of love? Why is there pain and suffering in this world today? We then have to tackle that question. We'll be talking about that in tomorrow night's presentation at 7 p.m. entitled The Cosmic Conflict. And on Sunday night, we'll be looking at Revelation's Lamb, the key to hope. Based on the first three presentations, how can we have hope knowing all of this information? It's going to be a powerful weekend. We're going to be looking at a lot of great information. I'm excited that each of you were able to make it out here this evening as we began our Revelation of Healing seminar. And we invite you to come back night after night as we seek mental, emotional, physical, and yes, spiritual healing in our lives today. God bless. Thank you for coming out. We'll see you tomorrow at 11 a.m., tomorrow at 7 p.m., and please stay for the refreshments in the fellowship hall. Drive safe. God bless.